Hello Croatian learners, and welcome back to our channel Learn Croatian. If you have been trying to learn Croatian verbs, you have come to the right place. Today I would like to help you learn the perfect tense, which is one of the past tenses in Croatian. So stay tuned and let's learn together. So as you have heard in the introduction, there are actually more tenses which express the past in Croatian. It's kind of like English tense or English language. You have the simple past, you have the past continuous tense, you have the present perfect tense, and all of these different tenses which kind of express the past. Well, in Croatian, there are four tenses which express the past. However, especially if you're a new learner of Croatian, you only need to know one, and this tense is the perfect tense, or as we call it, perfect. So that's what this video is going to be about. I want to talk first on how to form the perfect tense. Now, the perfect tense is used to express the past action which either started in the past or happened in the past or is still ongoing in the past. So we need to know how to form this verb. In order to form the perfect tense, you need to know that the perfect tense is a compound verb, meaning it is made up of more than one word. If you remember, the present tense is formed only with one word, and actually the present tense is a little bit more trickier than the perfect tense. So for the perfect tense, in order to form the perfect tense, you need two words. One is a shortened form of the auxiliary verb to be, or biti. Let's take a look at what is this verb to biti, or what it sounds like in Croatian. So if you look at the screen here, you have the first, second, third person singular and first, second, third person plural. You, he, she, it, we, you, they. Now, the present tense is of the verb to be, or biti, is jesam, jesi, jeste, jesmo, jeste, jesu. Now, notice in the brackets that there is a shortened form, and the shortened form is used most of the time. However, we will see later that you need to use the longer form as well. However, for the perfect tense, in order to form it, you need the shortened form of the verb biti. Sam, si, je, smo, ste, su. You will notice that you get the shorter form if you take let's call it a prefix, je, off, and whatever is left is the shortened form of the verb biti. Now, this is our first word that we need in order to form the perfect tense. The second word is the past participle. This word sort of acts like an adjective, and in fact, the word itself in Croatian is called a verbal adjective. This is important to know because the past participle actually expresses gender. Yes, I know the nouns are usually the words in Croatian which express gender, but as you can see, there are things in the verbs as well which express the gender. This is important to know because we will see that there are certain suffixes or endings that you add on to the root of the word in order to get the past participle, and you always have to keep in mind that it has to match the gender of the subject. Okay, so you have, as you know, the three genders: masculine, feminine, and a neuter. And in order to make the past participle, you have these endings: o for masculine, la for feminine, and lo for neuter, and these are all singular. And then for the plural, li, masculine, le, feminine, and la, neuter. Now, where do you add these endings? That's the next question. Maybe the easiest way to memorize how to make the past participle is if you take the infinitive of the verb. For example, a verb to read, jeti. Okay, so let's take the verb jeti, and let's take off the ending t, which is the ending for the infinitive. So take it off, and then you have the infinitive base form. You have čita, and then on this infinitive base form, you would add these endings which I mentioned earlier, o, la, lo, li, le, la. So if you are talking about a guy and you want to make a masculine past participle, you would use čita plus the ending o, čitao. Now this verb itself is actually a verbal adjective, and that's why it expresses the gender. So now we have the auxiliary verb biti, and we have the past participle. When you put these two together as two separate words, you get the perfect tense. Je čitao, or čitao je. So let's use it in a sentence. He was reading a book. On je čitao knjigu. Okay. This is probably a good time to mention those dreaded perfective and imperfective verbs in Croatian. If you watched the introductory video about the verbs, I shortly mentioned these two. These are sort of a headache for Croatian grammar and for everybody who is trying to learn the language. The reason for this is because the perfective verb kind of expresses the action which was finished, and then the imperfective expresses the action that's sort of still ongoing. And maybe the best way to learn the difference between these two is if you think of for example, simple past and past continuous. So he was reading a book. He's probably maybe still reading it, right? So he was reading it, he probably hasn't finished, but he read the book. It means that the action is finished. So in Croatian, instead of having two different tenses to express this, as does English, you actually have two different verbs. So in Croatian, for the verb to read, you have two different words. You have čitao je, which is the past imperfective verb for the masculine, and it means he was reading, or pročitao je, which is the perfective form of the verb to read. He has read, or he read. Probably the best way for you to learn the perfective and imperfective verbs is just to learn the both forms of these verbs, because there's normally not a certain formula which you can follow to form one verb out of the other. I'll talk about this more in another video. So just be careful when you are learning new verbs. Both perfective and imperfective verb would be formed the same. So just the root word would be different. So you can say on je čitao knjigu and on je pročitao knjigu. Both of these are the perfect tense. Both are formed with the verb biti and the past participle. However, they express the perfective or imperfective action. So if you want to say he has finished reading the book, you would use the perfective form, which is on je pročitao knjigu. And if you want to say that he was reading a book, you would use the imperfective, which is on je čitao knjigu. Now there will be more talk about the perfective and imperfective verbs in another video, I just wanted to give you a heads up and to let you know that the past tense, this is what can happen. So don't be surprised if you learn one verb and all of a sudden you hear or read another form of this verb. It basically means the same. It just matters if the action is finished or ongoing. And if you have been learning Croatian for a while, you know that Croatian cannot go without exceptions. So, for the perfect tense in Croatian, there are a few exceptions in how the verbs are made. Normally, the exceptions boil down to the verbs that end on chi in infinitive. If you know already, most of the verbs in Croatian in the infinitive form end on ti, but there are some that end on chi. Now, these verbs are sometimes very difficult to conjugate or to change through different persons. Because their infinitive base form is a little different. You might already know that there are a lot of sound changes in Croatian, so these verbs go through a lot of sound changes. That's why a lot of these words have a very different base form, and that's why a lot of these words will have very weird past participle. Now, there is a lot that goes on in the background on how the past participle is made, but the easiest way for you to learn these verbs that end on chi is actually to learn the masculine form, and then once you know the masculine form of the past participle, you'll be able to make all the other forms. So for instance, the verb to go, it's ichi in infinitive. So the perfect tense is išao je. Išao je, he went. Išla je, she went. Išlo je, it went, and so on and so forth. The majority of these verbs in the masculine will have the ending AO instead of just O. So this is the only exception. The other genders are made in the same way as you have learned before, but the masculine form, it has an AO ending instead of just O. You can see that ish is the infinitive base form. Now, if you followed just the normal rule for the endings, you would just put an O on there and be done, and you would say išo je, which, truth be told, can be heard with the native speakers. However, it's incorrect. So the masculine form has to end on AO, išao. Okay? So this was the exception for the verbs that end on chi. There are some other exceptions for verbs that end on jeti. Again, the change happens in the masculine form of the past participle. So let's look at the verb letjeti. If you remember, in order to make the past participle, you take the infinitive, take off ti, and add the different endings. So following that logic, you would say letje, you take T off, letje, and then you add o, la, lo, or li, le, la. So for the feminine one, it will be letjela, letjela je, she flew. Now for the masculine, this is where the change happens. You wouldn't say letjeo. In fact, that's quite incorrect. But you would change the je, ye, into I. So you would have letio. The same happens with another verb, htjeti. Htjeti, as you can see, ends on jeti. So for the feminine and neuter, it's the same form. You just take the ti and add the endings. But for the masculine one, you have to change je into I. Htio, not htjeo. Although you would say htjela. So htjela and htio. Another exception is in with the verbs that end on sti or sti. In these verbs, you wouldn't take the ti off to get the infinitive base form. You would take off the sti ending. So for example, you have a verb siesti. Okay, siesti, to sit down. You would take the sti, so the infinitive base form would be sie, and then you add the endings o for masculine, sieo, la for feminine, siela, or lo for neuter, cielo, and so on. So these are the three exceptions on how to form the past participle or the verbal adjective. Remember, the exceptions are with the verbs that end on chi, verbs that end on jeti, and verbs that end on sti. All the other verbs, or I would say the majority of all the other verbs that end on t, you would just take the t off and add the endings ola, lo, li, le, la. And of course, with the past participle, you would add the verb biti, the shorter form. So let's just practice a little bit of these verbs, okay? Let's use the verb trčati, to run. How would you say they ran or they were running? It's the same verb. They is oni. And now to express ran, you need the auxiliary verb to be and the past participle. Oni su trčali. Okay? How would you say I ran down this? I ran. Ja sam trčala. Because I'm a girl. If I was a guy, I would say ja sam trčao. Or if you want to say that kid ran down the street, the kid is dijete and it's neuter. So dijete je trčalo. Okay, I think this is quite clear. So remember, you just need the verb biti and the past participle in order to make the perfect tense in Croatian. Now, because there are two words which make up a perfect tense, it is important to talk about the word order. Okay, so let's look at these two examples. Ona je čitala knjigu. She was reading a book. Or čitala je knjigu. She was reading a book. See, there is no difference in the translation because of the property of the verbs in Croatian, you can completely omit the subject. However, if you omit the subject, the word order sort of slightly changes. Let's look at it again. Ona je čitala knjigu. The subject is ona. Okay, and on the second place in the sentence, right after the subject, you have the auxiliary verb biti. So ona je, and then the past participle čitala. Ona je čitala knjigu. However, if you omit the subject, then you get this sentence. Čitala je knjigu. Now notice this. The auxiliary verb biti is always on the second place in the sentence. Regardless of whether the subject is there or if it's omitted, the verb biti is always going to be on the second place, okay? The reason you can omit the subject completely is because the verb itself will tell you which person you're talking about. Is it the first, second, third person singular or plural? And which gender you're talking about. So if you say čitala je knjigu, immediately you can see that you're talking about a woman or a girl. Okay? Let's look at another example. Oni su kupovali kruh. They were buying bread. Or kupovali su kruh. Kupovali su kruh. The past participle is now first because the subject is omitted, but again the auxiliary verb is still on the second place. Now, when you think about the perfect tense, you need these two words. You need biti and you need the past participle. Now, don't think of them as having to stand one next to another, because there are sentences where the past participle can be somewhere else in the sentence, but the auxiliary verb biti has to come second, okay? Because you can say she was running joyfully towards her mom. Ona je radosno trčala prema mami. Now, you notice that the auxiliary verb and the past participle are separated. So they don't have to stand one next to another. What's important for you to remember is that the auxiliary verb comes second, and it comes usually always has to come after the subject. Now, you will often hear local speakers put an entire, if the subject has more than one word. So, for example, my friends were looking for a taxi. The locals will usually put an entire subject first and then the auxiliary verb. However, the correct way to use it is to put the auxiliary verb in the second place as a second verb. So you would hear locals say, my friends were looking for a taxi. Moji prijatelji su tražili taksi. But the correct way would be to put it on the second place. Moji su prijatelji. In a literal translation, our friends were looking for a taxi. Moji su prijatelji tražili taksi. Now, even if you put it after the entire subject, you won't make a big mistake, but the correct way is to put the auxiliary verb second. So, to summarize, because the perfect tense is made up of two words, you would put the auxiliary verb second, and the past participle can come in some other place in the sentence. Normally they stand together if you don't have, if the sentences are simple and short. So remember, auxiliary verb second place, regardless of the subject. Let's talk about how to form the negative sentences for the perfect tense. So in order to form the negative sentences, you need to use the negative form of the auxiliary verb biti. The way to make the negative form is to add a prefix, ni, to the auxiliary verb. So if you remember, the verb is sam, si, je, smo, ste, su. You would just add a prefix to the existing verb and you would get the negative form. Nisam, nisi, nije, nismo, niste, nisu. Now, in order to form a negative sentence, just use the negative form of the auxiliary verb and the past participle, which you already know. So, for example, she was reading a book. Ona je čitala knjigu. She wasn't reading a book. Ona nije čitala knjigu. Or we were looking for a dog all day long. Tražili smo psa cijeli dan. Or we weren't looking for a dog all day long. Nismo tražili psa cijeli dan. Okay, so here I gave you a few examples with the differences between the indicative and the negative form. So let's look at the first one. Jučer sam kupila kruh. Yesterday I bought bread. Or jučer nisam kupila kruh. Yesterday I didn't buy bread. Marko je pročitao tu knjigu. Marko read that book. Or Marko nije pročitao tu knjigu. Moji su roditelji prodali stan. Moji roditelji nisu prodali stan. Let me stop here right now. So I told you that the auxiliary verb has to come second. Now, in the negative sentences, that rule doesn't stick anymore. You can see that the negative form of the auxiliary verb in this case came after the entire subject. So for the indicative sentence, moji su roditelji prodali stan, the auxiliary verb came second. However, the negation came after the entire subject, which is made of two words. Moji roditelji nisu prodali stan. Now, normally for the negative perfect tense, the auxiliary verb and the past participle will stand together in the sentence, and the auxiliary verb will come right before the past participle. So, moji su roditelji prodali stan, moji roditelji nisu prodali stan. How to ask questions with the perfect tense in Croatian. In order to form interrogative sentences, you need a little word which is actually an interrogative particle. And this interrogative particle is li, just L-I. It's the same for any person, any gender. In order to make the question, you need this interrogative particle basically in the middle between these two words. Let's look at an example. So you would say, pročitala sam knjigu. I would say, pročitala sam knjigu. I have read a book, or I read a book. Pročitala sam knjigu. So in order to ask a question, did I read a book? I need the longer form of the auxiliary verb, biti, then interrogative particle, and then the past participle. So, did I read a book? Jesam, interrogative particle li, and the past participle pročitala. Jesam li pročitala knjigu? Did I read the book? Now, when you ask questions, remember to use the longer form of the auxiliary verb, the interrogative particle, and then the past participle. Except for the third person singular. So if you're talking about him or her or it, you still need to use the shorter form. Je li pročitao knjigu? Did he read a book? Je li pročitala knjigu? Did she read the book? Or je li pročitalo knjigu? Did it read a book? Again, to ask questions, you need to put an auxiliary verb first, then the interrogative particle, and then the past participle. And remember to use the longer form of the auxiliary verb, except for the third person singular. A little bit more about the word order. If you want to omit the subject, then the word order is the auxiliary verb, the interrogative particle li, the past participle, and then the object. Jesam li pročitala knjigu. Okay, but if you want to use the subject, then the word order is as follows. Jesam li ja pročitala knjigu. The subject comes after the interrogative particle li. Jesam li ja pročitala knjigu? Je li on pročitao knjigu? Did he read the book? Okay, everybody, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was clear on how to form and how to make the perfect tense in Croatian. Remember, there are still 3 tenses which express the past, but this one is the main one and you will use it the most in the Croatian language. Again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'm here for you and I will help you and answer your questions to the best of my ability. Thank you so much for watching. watching. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up and please share it with your friends and hit the subscribe button, because I love to make videos for you and I want to help you to learn Croatian. Please stick at it. Again, use it as much as you can. Try to find the native speakers and speak to them, or just speak to yourself and practice, 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 because practice makes perfect. If you have any questions, I'm here for you. And until next time, doviđenja and sretno. Bye bye.